Fascinating rhythm, you got me on the go. Fascinating rhythm, I'm on a grip.
Once upon a time, a teenager in the suburbs of North London uploaded some videos to YouTube, and they became a global sensation.
One, two, three, come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination.
I'm here in North London, heading for the world of Jacob Collier.
Your imagination, worship the beloved with a king.
Jacob's extraordinary a cappella harmonies went viral and caught the attention of music world legends Quincy Jones and Herbie Hancock.
I promise you've never seen this before, I've heard this before.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry about a thing, baby.
I thought I was good with harmonies. No, he was all over my stuff and past that.
Jacob's YouTube uploads turned out to be the opening act of a musical career that has been meteoric.
Next Guest is nominated for 2 Grammys, including Album of the Year.
Jacob's multi-instrumental skills are dazzling.
So I imagine we were playing a game. Something like you could be an animal and all I had to do is be tame.
And he collaborates with music world superstars.
Nothing to lose.
He's like nothing I've ever seen before, worked with before, listened to before.
Night and day, light and dawn.
He's so in demand.
Any day could be torn in half.
We all recognize, oh, this guy can make us sound better.
When my love is my protection,
Jacob now tours the world.
I'll be a world of your projection.
And his music crosses all boundaries of genre, from pop to jazz to classical.
The reason he doesn't sound like he has any boundaries when he plays is because what is going in doesn't have any boundaries.
He can't help but explore.
'Cause I've been sleeping all my dreams.
Jacob made music history by being the only British artist ever to win Grammys for each of his first 4 albums. Not even the Beatles did that.
Sleeping all my dreams.
Jacob doesn't have a Hollywood mansion. When he's not touring the globe, he lives a very down-to-earth existence.
I think I'm getting warm.
He's still producing music out of a small room in the family home where he lives with his mum.
Come on in.
So, this is the legendary music room.
It's my favourite room in the world.
This is the room, we're in the room where it happens.
I love the way that I feel when you put your arms over me.
When did you first come to this room? What can you remember?
I learned to walk in here, age 1.
'Cause every time I think about it, can't stop thinking about it.
I see this array of guitars.
Along here, yeah, all sorts of guitars, different stages of my life. This is my first guitar ever, a nylon string.
And how old were you then?
I was about, I think, 14 or so. And my first ever bass guitar was this guy, which I think was about the same time as this guy, so age 14 or so, and it seemed so big in my hands. To me, I think whenever I play any instrument, I'm just trying to be a voice. whether it's a piano or drums or guitar or ukulele or whatever. It's all really the same language. Like this typewriter here. That's nice.
And until now, as far as I can see, all that work I've seen of yours on YouTube, all those endless things, they were all made in this room.
It's all in here. I did it all on one mic until I was 20, and I wanted to show you that mic actually,
Yeah.
because it's such a cool beastie. Okay, check this out, black velvet bag. This is my original SM58 Shure microphone.
Yeah. Hey, that's an antique.
It's an antique, and I don't mean to brag, but it smells really good. Go on, have a go. This is the kind of mothership.
The mothership,
Yeah.
It was here where Jacob's ambitious experiment with harmonization, his computer wizardry, and the power of social media would all converge to change his life forever.
Everybody's got a thing.
It was Jacob's arrangement of the Stevie Wonder classic, Don't You Worry About a Thing, that went viral.
Just taking the things not worth having. Don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry about a thing, baby.
I took that song and I went absolutely nuts on it, like harmonically, because I just wanted to reach the limits of this fabric. I knew chords and I knew the piano, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to go further. I wanted to go deeper.
Don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry about a thing, baby.
I was doing all this stuff. I didn't understand what I was doing, but I was doing microtones, you know, notes between notes on the piano. And some of these notes, like this one, see, that's a quarter tone. You can't play that on a piano. You have to do that by ear because it doesn't exist on the piano. It goes da 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 like this. It goes between the two notes.
The things which always surprised me about Jacob is his inherent knowledge of how to get in between the cracks of the Western scale, and you know those quarter tone things he does, you know, which way beyond me.
And here, I actually managed to find the session.
When you hear it, it sounds uniquely like him. That's the great thing, you can recognise. And that's almost what all musicians are after. And when they start, they're trying to sound like somebody else, but actually what they want is their own sound. You know, whether you like it or you don't like it, it doesn't matter. So you recognise, oh, that's them, that's their sound, that's their voice.
If you isolate the parts,
Standing on the side when you check it.
they sound really strange.
Cause I'll be standing on the side when you check it. Cause I'll be standing on the side when you check it.
And in the end, when you combine those,
Cause I'll be standing on the side when you check it.
and then, now, these chords are incredibly dense, complex chords.
And you get off your trip.
Really dense, jazz-inspired, classical-inspired chords. And all I'm thinking about is the way in which the notes move between each other as melodies. And then, does it feel good? And otherwise, there are no rules.
So much of what he does is at the edge of the impossible.
Don't you worry about it.
Jacob's homage to the Stevie Wonder classic also contains a multi-instrumental flourish. The guitar, mandolin, double bass, keyboard, piano, djembe drums, and other percussion instruments are all being played by Jacob.
Anyway, it got to the point where the video was done, and I put Don't Worry About a Thing by Stevie Wonder, arranged and performed by Jacob Collier in this typeface font. And there's always a moment when you get that feeling when you think, am I ready to do this? I'm not quite sure, because it's very personal, all this stuff for me, you know, all the process of layering these tracks and filming these videos and all this stuff takes time. And obviously you're excited to share it, but I remember there was a part of me that said, Jacob, are you sure that you want to do this?
Jacob at that time said, I'm not sure I'm ready to release it and give it away into the world. And I said, I really understand that. I think you'll make people's lives a lot better if you do. But I have a feeling, Jacob, that if you do put it out there, that nothing will ever be the same again.
You take that leap and you don't know what's going to happen after you take that leap. And this is a screenshot of the moment I pressed upload. Here it says, no views. From this exact second onwards, the view count started to climb. And it climbed faster than I'd ever seen anything climb before of mine. And yeah, within a couple of days, I think it was about 100,000. So I put it on Bandcamp, which is a website, you know, it's like £1, you can download it. And I'm looking at my email thinking, someone's having a laugh. This blew my mind. And this is an email I received from Bandcamp. Bada boom, it says, another £12. Greetings, Jacob Collier. Herbie Hancock has just bought a cart full of, don't you worry about a thing, pure imagination, I wouldn't be for money, isn't shelby, I've told a little star. And then I received this little message that came with it. It says, wow, Jacob, your stuff is amazing. Please keep expanding in your life as well as in your music. I believe that craft may be about melody, rhythm, and harmony of the notes, but music is about life.
Herbie Hancock.
Yeah.
I will never forget the first time I saw his YouTube video on Don't You Worry About a Thing. It blew my mind. And he was a teenager. So I wrote him a little letter, you know, telling him how much I adored what he had done.
There had been a decade before that of just swimming in Herbie Hancock, harmonically, pianistically, pocket, you know, I was just obsessed with him. And so here he is in my Gmail inbox, and I couldn't believe my eyes.
The day that Jacob uploaded the video, Don't You Worry About a Thing, it was everywhere. We got messages on Quincy's Facebook. Some of my artists had forwarded it to me. I was like, okay, I gotta show this to Quincy.
Quincy Jones is one of the world's most acclaimed music producers. Over 6 decades, he's worked with Aretha Franklin, Frank Sinatra, Stevie Wonder, and Miles Davis, to name just a few.
And I showed it to Quincy, and Quincy just lost his mind. He said, I don't care what you're doing right now. I don't care how busy you are. Find this kid.
And so I get this email from actually someone on Quincy's team saying, Quincy's just seen Don't You Worry About a Thing and just freaked out and just wants to get on Skype. Are you down? I said, yeah, I'm down. Of course, when?
So you're how old now, 18?
By this point, I was 19. And I woke up at 7 in the morning. You can see the morning sunshine here coming through the window.
Yeah.
This is the moment.
You captured it.
I did. I thought, you know what, I might just screenshot this.
What else would you do with him? Not call him? 12 notes all over the world for 700 years, and you have to make it through rhythm, melody, and harmony. You have to make it work. Jacob knows how to make it work.
The first thing he said was, man, where'd you get those chords?
Whatever he does blows my mind. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. But he's that way with anything he touches, though. And that's what hypnotized me when I first saw him.
And action.
Today, Jacob's musical identity and multi-instrumental talents are complemented by his collection of flamboyant shirts.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out which one I preferred. Number 2, I think. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So I want to start at the beginning, right at the beginning. What is your first musical memory? What do you retain now?
First musical memory, I would probably say, was sitting in that room over there, which is the music room of the house. Sitting on my mum's lap and watching her play the violin above my head. And that was my first experience of music and one of my first memories ever, actually.
My dad said to me, the moment Jacob popped out, he said, you just got to just keep playing to him. Play him the lullaby. Play him anything.
I picked up the violin around that time. I'd say probably 18 months to 2 years old. And by age 4 or 5, I'd pretty much given up.
Did it disappoint you that Jacob didn't take up the violin?
Oh, that's really interesting.
I was impatient for results. I wanted to hear a sound the moment that I could conceive it. So a drum or a piano would go bang or smash. But a violin, it takes a year or so at least to even make one note sound good on the violin.
Was I disappointed? No, absolutely not. I mean, the child showed me already that he was so aware of the sound world. You don't need to have the violin.
Susie Collier is a classical violinist, conductor, and professor of music.
Okay. But you're going to really suck the bow with so much power.
Jacob's mother, Susie, she is an incredible, a really amazing teacher of music. I learn things when I've, again, through the modern world of Instagram, I watch her and I learn things and you think, wow, that's great. I wish somebody had said that. I'm really pleased I know that now.
There's a story, isn't there, about your Hoover?
There is a story about our Hoover. It's really true. One day the Hoover's on and I simply say, what do you think that note is?
Your mother came in with a Hoover and asked you to tell her what note it was.
That's true.
How did you respond?
It was a funny thing because obviously when you're growing up, there's sounds all around you. And many of those sounds are pitched sounds. You know, the kettle goes boing, or the Hoover turns on, or the microwave beeps, or the car alarm, whatever. And so what she began to kind of enable in me was a sense of curiosity about how that note feels or felt.
Sing that note. See if you can kind of resonate with it and just get the same frequency.
I have a sense that music somehow is embedded in your DNA. Where does it come from?
I had musical parents. They were both violinists. And this was my father's violin, which he bestowed upon me when I was a student. And he said to me, I think this is the violin for you. I think it will really match your personality and it'll bring out the warmth in your playing.
Your mother?
Yes.
Your brother?
Indeed.
There's you. And that's your father in the background. Yeah.
That's my father. My mother was Chinese-Canadian. She ended up coming over and went to the Royal College of Music. My dad was the youngest student at the Royal Academy of Music, and in the end, they met. I moved into this house in 1989. From that moment, we've made music in every single room in this house.
I would just go over there and press the play button on the CD player and just wonder what would come out, you know.
Mozart.
Herbie Hancock, Bach.
Benjamin Britten, obviously.
Britten was earth-shattering to me because it redefined the whole of what it meant to be a singer, a musician, a composer, a harmonist.
It could be anything by Sting.
It was huge for me, Sting, to stand there with that bass and sing. And he was the first person I ever saw do that at the same time. It's like, oh, so you can do both. On heavy rotation were people like Stevie Wonder and Bobby McFerrin. He was the absolute master and still is the master at using his voice to be many instruments at once.
It could be anything by Earth, Wind and Fire.
From a very early age, complex harmonizations caught Jacob's ear, especially the gospel-inspired a cappella group Take 6.
Take 6 is one of my absolute favourites of all time. Yep. Doing this insane modulation in harmony.
At around 6 years old, Jacob was given his first Casio keyboard and a Cubase software program. The means for starting a music room revolution were now in his hands.
Let me take you right back.
Okay.
This is 2006, so I was 11 and then turning 12. And I was obsessed with maths, and I was also obsessed with music. And so my solution to this problem was to harmonise the times tables with my little 12-year-old voice. No one's ever heard these before. This is the first time I've ever showed anyone this, really. Well, let's see, 3.
3 times table. 3 times table.
You've doubled your voice up.
Yeah, that's 2 voices. Now 3 voices. And I'm playing bass. Here we go now.
1 times 3 is 3. And 2 times 3 is 6. 9 times table. 9 times table. 9 times table.
While he was working on the times tables, they would be completely caught in our heads, and we would know those tables back to front. Stuff that he's been into and stuff that he's been working on has been a huge part of the kind of soundtrack to my life.
Here we go.
1 times 7 is 7.
Okay.
2 times 7 is 14. 3 times 7 is 21. 4 times 7.
My whole family would get sick of it, just so sick of this recording.
I don't really remember it driving me crazy. I think you kind of just get into the groove of it. A lot of people might assume that there was a massive musical rivalry between us as siblings, but I think it would have been hard if I'd been trying to be a professional musician, you know, but my day job is to be a structural engineer. Music is so intrinsic to what our family is. It's not really a question of rivalry. I think there's been much more of a focus on the joy of making music, often together.
When Jacob was 10, his parents separated, and his mother, Susie, raised 3 children on her own.
You have been a single mum for many years, so it's quite an achievement for you, having been able to do this, to harmonise your family, to create this sort of sense of achievement. Are there tough times you've been through? Are there times when you feel this is too much, you can't cope with it?
If I just sit in that and just think I'm just really alone with these children, then it becomes such a huge and overpowering thing. Do we experience the darkest of times? Absolutely. Absolutely. But positive energy, I think, is always somehow in there, pervading the very, very darkest of times.
In terms of the life bumps that he and his family have been through, that's also a blessing, because I think that's where his drive comes from. You know, the thing that's like, right, I'm gonna make something of this.
You like to perform, that engagement with the audience is something. So this is obviously something from very early on. Did you ever want to be an actor?
I had a moment where acting surfaced in my life, which is really fun.
Oh, what a day, I don't care if it's grey, if it's Christmas together.
9-year-old Jacob played Tiny Tim in a film version of A Christmas Carol, starring Kelsey Grammer.
I started singing lessons at age 8, and they went till I was about 13 years old.
I think the work on the Christmas Carol film was really important, and we both spent a long time out in Budapest.
Tiny Tim, if I may, young sir.
Here's his coat, Mother. Wait, we're coming. Oh, thank you, Mr. Scrooge.
Why, you're as light as a feather. I believe we shall become fast friends, young man, you and I.
I could tell that he was taking in all sorts of ideas about direction.
I never really seriously considered it, partly because I was never very good at pretending. It's one of the reasons why, in some ways, that the music industry can be a weird place to be, because so many people are performing and exaggerating themselves the whole time, and it's all really... And I think my approach to performance is always just to sort of do the thing. The first instrument I truly gravitated towards was the piano. This is my original double bass.
Yeah, it's quite a beauty.
It wasn't until I was about 14 until I picked up the bass, which is my next instrument. And something about standing with an instrument as well. These two beasties are called arpeggios. The way this instrument works is you lay it on the floor, or you can put it on a keyboard stand. And the first tune I ever learnt on the arpeggio was this James Taylor song called Carolina in My Mind. And this was sort of the first challenge, because I thought if I can play this song, it will unlock lots of other songs that I can then play. And I haven't played it in ages. And it goes something like this. I had been really obviously obsessed with chords for some time. And I think lots of young musicians often come up against this moment where they think, well, I don't know what I need to know next, but I want to get to that next stage. When I was about 14 years old, a family friend introduced me to a piano player called Gwilym Simcock. And I managed to go to a gig that he was doing. And it was a huge moment for me because I realized, hearing Gwilym, that I didn't know anything about the piano. But that there was so much I wanted to learn. And at the end of the gig, I went up to him with my mum at the end and said, you know, Gwilym, I'm such a huge fan, and I would just love to have a lesson one day.
I think he must have been about 14 or 15 at that time. There's a long way for many musicians to go at that stage, and I've taught many people over the years, and of course at that stage you're a lot of the time dealing a lot more with the rudiments.
And he said, well, play me something. So I played him something, I can't remember what I played him now, probably a simple jazz standard or something that I knew. And I basically used these 6 fingers here. I didn't use these ones, I just did this. So I would play with these really, really dense chords, and because that's what I knew that he loved as well.
It seems like a million years ago now, but I do remember kind of some of his responses to the things I was suggesting and just his general approach to what we were looking at.
He told me something that kind of surprised me and slightly miffed me, which was, I think you should practice some scales. That's what he said. He said, when you have technique, then your technique will give your ears ideas. And I always thought that your ears dictated everything. If you heard it, you could play it, because that was my experience. What I didn't realize is if you give yourself a capacity that's greater than your ears, then your ears just sponge up all the technique and grow as well.
It's impossible to take much credit for anything that he's done. You know, everything is basically self-taught with him, so the fact that some of the music that I've made has had a nice impact on him is very, very special for me.
At around 2011, so when I was 16, 17, that's when I made my first ever YouTube video, which was called Serendipity. This was the first moment I tried to make something that I could look at to go with what I was hearing.
So you're actually trying different things, absorbing different things, understand where you're going and where the journey's taking you. And as you say, you then have
Exactly. Yeah, and I didn't know where I was going, but I just tried as much as I possibly could. So from times tables to covering pop songs to eventually harmonizing jazz tunes. I wasn't thinking too much about what I was doing. I was just doing things that were the most satisfying to me. I kept uploading these videos, and each time I'd upload one, it would be another little bump of audience members or whatever.
I found Jacob because I was half asleep listening to a playlist of choral music. And I woke up in the middle of this piece by someone called Jacob Collier, and I thought, oh, he must be from the 16th century. And he immediately just won my heart. And I'd only heard one piece at that point.
And the rabbit hole on YouTube of like all his amazing videos, like him performing, him doing his harmonies, of like him doing the covers, and yeah, it's like a magician at work. That
because Jacob's come up during social media where you have direct communication with your audience, that there's no middleman at all. It's all perfectly suited to him, just reaching you directly.
He really was born at the right time.
And then came this arrangement of a Stevie Wonder song called Don't You Worry About a Thing.
Don't you worry about a thing.
Quincy was so in love with Don't You Worry About a Thing, and later the fascinating rhythm cover that Jacob did as well, that he would start every single meeting by showing those two videos to whoever he was meeting with. It didn't matter if that was Paul McCartney or Queen Rania. He would show that video and say, I've never seen anything like this, have you? So we invited him to come meet us in person for the first time at the Montreux Jazz Festival in Montreux, Switzerland.
So I thought, okay, well, I'll go then.
I met him at the airport. We went back to Montreux together.
We entered this hotel lobby and there was Quincy at this piano.
And the two of us surprised Quincy, and Quincy jumped up from his chair and was like, Jacob Collier!
And he was like, man, show me some of those chords you were playing. And he's saying, what are those chords? Don't you worry about a thing. And I'm saying, oh, it was this chord. And then, oh, actually, you can't play this next chord because it has a microtone in it. You can't play it on the piano. That note doesn't exist. And he's like, wow, that's cool. Let's go to the jam.
Because he's going to take us into the future, I'd like you to get ready with some real serious talent here.
And Quincy gets the mic and says, right, I want to introduce you to a young man, Jacob Collier. So I stand up and I played My Funny Valentine.
Unscheduled late-night jams are a Montreux tradition.
There's Herbie Hancock sitting there, and I'm thinking,
what a day.
What a day. You know, and my buffer is just full. I'm like,
When I got a chance to hear him in Montreux, that's when I got a chance to really hear his jazz chops. That's what we call that, right? And he's got the jazz chops, that's for sure.
Something happened.
Your looks are laughable.
Something kind of clicked.
Unphotographable.
And I just sort of felt like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I think I'm in the right place at the right time.
When you meet an artist for the first time, your priority is to get to know them and their dreams.
And then that night, after hanging out with all these people for so long and jamming in the jam for 4 hours, whatever, I go up to Quincy's hotel room and I sat on this balcony with Adam. And Adam said,
you know, what are you after with all of this? What do you want to do with your life?
I said, I don't know, man. I don't want to be jazz Jacob with a trio. I don't want to be pop Jacob with a mic. I don't want to be rock and roll Jacob at the front. I think I need some time to figure it out. I'm not sure.
Jacob has always kind of known what he wants to say yes to and why. And he said, do you think I really need a manager? I said, I really don't know. Maybe not. And when that call was made, Adam said, well, Quincy would really like to manage Jacob. I said, would it be possible to be friends first? And it's gone down in history because obviously no one's going to say no to Quincy Jones.
I wouldn't characterize it as him turning, you know, working with us down. I think it was just him being cautious.
What I made clear was, look, I have so much respect for Quincy, but I need to do this on my own.
It was on that call that we made the famous decision to start off just being friends. We started helping in every way we could.
And a couple of months later, Adam had somehow found a way to secure me a gig, my first ever gig, which was opening for Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea at the Montreux Jazz Festival, summer of 2015. And suddenly, I had a direction. That's the moment when I received a Facebook message from a man named Ben Bloomberg.
I saw this video, it was Don't You Worry About a Thing, and I sent a Facebook message saying, hey, I think you're really awesome. I love to build things. If you ever are interested in something to build or have any questions about technology, let me know.
As a music and technology innovator, Ben Bloomberg worked on the MIT Media Lab program, Opera of the Future. He also collaborated with pop stars Ariana Grande and Bjork.
The original message that Ben sent to Jacob through Facebook ended up in Jacob's spam in his email. And maybe a couple weeks later, Jacob happened upon it and forwarded the message to me. I looked at the message and said, oh man, this guy's from MIT. We need to reach out to him.
And then all of a sudden I got a message back. They had been offered a huge performance opportunity, and it was going to be Jacob's first real performance ever.
I got on Skype with Ben and I explained this idea I have of a one-man show where I could be at the center of a circle of instruments and I could be somehow playing them all at once. Basically doing what I do at home in stop time, but doing it in real time. And also that at the center of this kind of beast, I wanted to have this instrument where I could sing any note and I could play harmonies and you'd hear my voice singing all the notes of the chords. I wanted a way to stand on stage and go, ah, and you'd hear 12 voices come out, basically.
The harmonizer was one of the first things that we thought about.
Jacob would fly to Boston, and in Ben's apartment, they would create the prototype for a one-of-a-kind harmonizer, which would accompany Jacob on his first official Montreux Jazz Festival performance.
Jacob! "20 years old. I promise you, you've never seen this before, heard this before. Never!" Merci.
And it was like time stood still a little bit. It was like, well, here we go. Like, this is the start of something. I'm sort of standing there like this, playing. And I'm nailing all my musical parts. I mean, that was fine. But just furtive looking. I was basically inside my room. I hadn't left the room yet, you know.
And you were in front of hundreds of people.
3,000 people, yeah. And they, you know, they didn't know, who's this boy in his pajamas on stage, you know. And it was the start of learning how to work with an audience.
Jacob also integrated a specially designed video looping system for his live performances.
At the time that he performed, I wasn't thinking about his age. I wanted to hear his music. It was amazing. He's such an amazing talent. And he plays all these instruments, drums, and bass, and guitar, and percussion.
The Montreux gig would ignite Jacob's professional career.
Following this gig in Montreux, I'd sort of gained a little bit of confidence. Oh, I think I know what I'm doing. I think I'm ready to make an album now. I had this idea on a flight heading back home around that time that there was this amazing Beach Boys song called In My Room. And I'd always loved that song. And I always felt it's close to my heart because it's about this world that you make in your room that's a safe kind of world. And you can go and you can dream in the room and you can, you know, you just do my dreaming and my scheming. It's a gorgeous tune. In my room. And I thought, well, why don't we call the album In My Room? And I'll do the song on the album. I want to make this album. I just want to do it myself, for better or worse. I want to do it on my own, with my own ideas at the heart of it. And I felt like really what I wanted to do was I wanted the album to represent this world that I've created. I came up with this idea for fundraising for the album that I thought would be pretty fun. I thought, why don't I get people, fans in the world, to send me little melody clips, 15 seconds in length, of them singing, you know, a song they made up or a song they like or some improvising or whatever. And then you pledge, I think it was $100 for this campaign, and in return I'll harmonise your melody and put it on my social media.
It was a brainwave. It was one of those ideas that he came up with that he just ran with.
Someday when I'm awfully low and the world is cold, I will feel a glow just thinking of you. Someday when I'm awfully low and the world is cold, I will feel a glow just thinking of you.
I think I loved the ones that weren't necessarily amazing singers, but they did something really heartfelt.
You got to keep it mellow. Ooh, ooh.
And Jacob sort of magnified that into something that is just really moving to watch.
Whoa!
They're so giving.
To keep it mellow. Keep it mellow.
In some ways, that's when Jacob's at his strongest. You know, when he takes something that's ready-made and he's able to transform it into something completely different, which can then bring a lot of joy, not only to the original creator, but I think to everyone who listens to it.
It was so cool because it was like solving Sudoku puzzles. It was like, oh, today I'm harmonising this person who is singing in a language I don't speak,
Vengo del otro lado del charco,
a song I don't know.
Del otro lado del río, del otro lado del charco. Vengo del otro lado del charco, vengo del otro lado del río, vengo del otro lado del charco.
Some of them were really challenging. Like, you know, there was one baby who did one. Soleil May was her name. She's from Iceland.
When you say a baby, how old was she?
She was probably 1 or 2.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
In my mind, really interesting kind of microtonal stuff was going on because there was no pitch reference. It was just free from all pitch.
How I wonder what you are. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. How I wonder what you are.
It was able to transcend so many different barriers. So never mind where you were in the world, who you are in the world, whether you can just about put a tune together, whether you're 5 years old and you're just learning how to sing. So many people's stories underpin those iHarmonies.
La 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 la. La 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 la.
All right, here we go. Selfie mode. All yours. Take it away.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
Wow, come on, bring it through. Outstanding work.
Good for that, great.
Insane.
Am I in the wrong profession? Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. The I Harm You enterprise would help Jacob top up the budget for his first album.
You know, I realised how much work it is to make an album. I kind of thought about the different kinds of things I wanted to do. I wanted to incorporate guitars, which I hadn't really done that much. I wanted to do a couple of cool a cappella moments, because that was where I come from. I wanted it to be harmonically weird and have cool rhythms in it. I mean, really, I just wrote 11 songs. There's a lot of mixing, there's mastering to be done.
The final mix of Jacob's new album would take place in LA.
We were trying to find a specific console that could interface with the software he uses to produce and record and mix his music with. It just so happened to be that Hans Zimmer's studio had that console.
I went to Hans Zimmer's studio in Los Angeles, and I went there with Bem.
Hans Zimmer is one of Hollywood's most acclaimed film composers. He worked on 6 Christopher Nolan films, including Inception and the Batman trilogy.
You know, we did 3 movies, 3 Batman movies, and people think, oh, it's 3 movies. It's not 3 movies, it's 16 years of my life. What I didn't know was that Quincy Jones had booked my other studio for Jacob to work in. And I remember one day, you know, coming out of my room, going into the kitchen to make a cup of coffee. And there was a guy who was just making a cup of tea and he was going off into the other studio. And I'm going, it's really weird, there's this kid here and he looks just like Jacob Collier. And somebody said, that is Jacob Collier.
Now we know how to treat crap. We took the tracks out of Logic in groups and we mixed the album on a console together, which was really cool. Can we take out some low end of that as well?
Inevitably what happened was that Jacob just turned my studio into his bedroom, and the front door opens and it's like, Herbie Hancock's coming in, Chick Corea's coming. I mean, it's like all my heroes, they're all coming through my studio, not to see me, they're coming to see Jacob.
Hey, great. How you
Nice to see you. Thanks for coming.
This stuff is good.
Quincy and Herbie would just come and hang out.
How are you?
You know, we'd be working on a song and Herbie and Quincy would drop by 4 p.m. and they'd stay till the early hours of the morning, bopping their heads and singing along, and there'll be a moment in a tune where there's a chord that's really unruly chord.
Jacob always surprises me, always comes up with things I don't expect.
It got to that point and Herbie goes, oh man, what, stop. And we stop it and it's like, what is that chord? And I was like, oh, it's this. And it's like, oh, you know.
Oh!
D, F sharp, A, C sharp.
Oh, okay.
So he hears that chord and he just can't believe he's heard it.
He just goes, what have you done, what?
What was that? He's never come up with something that I object to. It may be just questioning what he had and what he was going to do with it. By the time he added either the vocal or the instrumental background, it answered my question.
We just have such a nice kind of chemistry, me and Herbie, because we both just geek out about the same kind of chords.
D major 7.
D major 7, right.
You get like the dominant at the top, but the major 7.
Oh, yeah. I love that. I love that.
It was one of the most magical couple of weeks of my whole life.
He was leaving to go back to London. He's on his way to the airport and we're talking on the phone. I think he phoned me to just say, thank you for letting me use the studio. And right at the end, just before the phone cuts off, before he has to get out of the cab, I'm going, are you ever interested in doing a movie? And he goes, yeah, of course.
You can sing what you want.
Jacob finished mastering his first album and landed a Hollywood gig with Hans Zimmer on a new animated feature, Boss Baby.
You can do it today.
Marcos, wait! Where are you?
I think working on music for film is a gorgeous challenge.
In July of 2016, Jacob's first album, In My Room, was released.
Take me anywhere you want to go.
It contained 8 original songs and 3 covers.
In my hideaway.
Every instrument on the album I played, every arrangement I put together.
There's a song of love that never
One of the arrangements was for the TV cartoon classic of the 60s, The Flintstones.
Flintstone, meet the Flintstones. They're a modern Stone Age family. Meet the Flintstones, they're a modern Stone Age family.
My album came out and I thought, this is what people do, isn't it? They have albums that come out and then they go on tour.
I won't have it you no more.
With the help of Ben Bloomberg, the Jacob Collier dream of taking his music room on the road would become a reality.
It started out with the US tours, just the two of us. A show every single day in a different city.
It was just me and Ben on the road. So Ben was the entirety of the crew and I was the entirety of the band.
It was completely overwhelming. 8 checked bags and then 3 carry-on bags. And we thought we could never do it again like this. We're not gonna make it.
We were so tired and ill at the end of that tour, you know, we just wrecked, but so fun, you know, so fun, so amazing to share these songs that I'd made and play them for people.
The world tour would keep Jacob and Ben on the road for months.
Thank you so much.
One morning, I'm just sleeping on Ben's sofa. He wakes me up in the morning and I'm thinking, what is it? And he says, dude, you just got nominated for 2 Grammys. And I said, really? And he said, yeah.
When, you know, it was announced that he was nominated for 2 Grammys, I remember screaming at the top of my lungs. You know, the whole team jumping up and down and celebrating.
And I said, yeah, did that really happen? Was it a dream? And he said, no, it's genuinely just happened today.
The 2 Grammy nominations were for the arrangements of You and I by Stevie Wonder and the Flintstones.
And the Grammy goes to Jacob Collier for You and I.
In his category, Jacob was the youngest Grammy winner in history.
Thank you to Mr. Quincy Jones, his team, Adam Fell and Michael Payer, amongst others, are here tonight. Thank you to my wonderful...
Suddenly, it feels very serious, the whole thing. It doesn't feel like just my experiment continuing. It feels like, oh, there's consequence.
And the night wasn't over.
And the Grammy Award goes to...
He needs to come back out.
Once more, he needs to come back out. Jacob Collier for Flintstones, my friends.
People are watching, you know, people who aren't your fans are watching. I think it was the first time I'd ever thought that. People who aren't Jacob fans are paying attention to what Jacob is doing now. Should we do some drums?
Yes.
Okay. I never identified with one instrument as being my thing. In the same way I did with genre, in a sense. I used to sit in this room and think, I don't need anybody. I can do everything on my own. But when you really sit and think about it, nothing is ever truly isolated, you know.
Jacob's next album would take on the challenge of collaborating with and composing for a 50-piece orchestra for the first time in his life.
I wanted to do something with other people. Because I'd done so much on my own for so long, I wanted to stretch out and I wanted to collaborate.
It was the Quincy Jones team who introduced Jacob to the Metropole Orchestra and its conductor, Jules Buckley.
Jules Buckley said he wanted to do like an orchestral collaborative project.
And your mother was performing?
She was in the orchestra, yeah. We all went to Holland, to Hilversum, and recorded. That was my first time writing for orchestra, really. I did the orchestration and I wrote it all out on paper. This is a whole new world for me. You know, I'd never written for orchestra before, but to have a piece that was being played by an orchestra, I wanted to make it really special.
Jacob's ambitions would expand into a series of 4 albums. The first would be orchestral, the next acoustic, The third would be primarily pop, and a fourth album is intended to be a synthesis of the previous three.
So the world is alive.
In the 3 volumes released so far of Jacob's ambitious series, he collaborates with more than 24 musicians from around the world. On album 3, released in 2020, Jacob works with an LA-based musician and producer, Ty Dolla $ign, and UK R&B singer Mahalia.
Now that I am sober, I take back what I said.
Jacob asked me if I wanted to be on one of his songs for his next album. When he called me and asked me, I like... Do you know what? I think my whole experience with Jacob has just been a lot of surprises.
The song is called All I Need. It's from Jesse Volume 3. Here now with help from Mahalia and Ty Dolla $ign, Jacob Collier live from the lavatory.
I remember Jacob texting me though saying, I think I'm going to send this to Ty. And I said, who's Ty? And he said, Ty Dolla $ign.
I didn't know her. I heard of her. I like her voice for sure. She's incredible.
She got expensive taste.
I collaborated with more than a few artists. Nicki Minaj, Ariana Grande, Mariah Carey. I had so much fun making that song.
That you were all I need. You were all I need.
It was lockdown. It just kind of gave me something to be excited about.
Jacob did his part. He sent me what he already had. I did exactly what I wanted to do. I sent it back to him.
Now, Jacob's setup was in his bathroom, and his bathroom was gorgeous, so I felt a little bit like I was on, like I had drawn the short straw.
Every time I think about it,
can't stop thinking about it, can't stop.
I think I had my mop brush, I think I had a toothbrush.
Next thing you know, he sent me the one with Mahalia's vocals on it. That was incredible. Video where I appear in the mirror and there's that cloud of smoke. I think that was just VFX, man, you know.
You will always be the one for me.
And he made a couple changes to it. We dropped it. Next thing you know, I think that song was nominated for a Grammy.
All I Need was nominated for R&B Song of the Year, and the album it was on was up for the Ultimate Industry Award.
Jesse Volume 3 was actually nominated for Album of the Year. That's the biggest honor you can get at the Grammy Awards.
And musicians really respect other musicians, no matter, you know, how you look or what you wear.
Only me. Well, my friends, the time has come.
Jacob would also collaborate with his all-time favorite harmonizing heroes, Take 6.
To me, this was my childhood dream. Take 6 are the boxes. That is just my mind was blown.
They covered the Lionel Richie track, All Night Long.
Quincy? Yeah. Holding the chord cymbals?
Yeah. Take 6 have been touring the world for more than 30 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Take 6!
And they would perform with Jacob on American TV.
We were flying home to do this TV show with Jacob. We were all preparing for what our parts were. Normally, no matter what it is, the guys will kind of listen, and I just kind of have their heads back like this. When we were preparing for Jacob's, everybody was sitting on the flight like this, listening to their individual part and doing this for hours and hours as they're flying. He's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so that's Walton right there. And we actually had a track breakdown when we went to Quincy's house the night before we recorded, and there was 40 or 50 voices that he had to reduce for the 6 of us to be able to sing with him.
on, you and I. Whoa, 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 'cause in my mind, we can stay here.
And then, in the thick of producing his series of albums, Jacob received the extraordinary honour of his own night at the proms.
I had a concert at the BBC Proms in London in 2018, my own BBC Prom, which was just an unbelievable thrill.
It was also a deeply emotional occasion for the entire Collier family.
I love the prom. I'm a frequent promer every summer. To see Jacob having a prom for himself, it was unbelievable, really. I remember I was quite nervous for him before. When he came on stage, those nerves vanished. I could just see he'd be able to do it.
I grew up in the Albert Hall. I went to proms every year. Suddenly it went from just Jacob to this huge array of people, this huge array of energy, all these different musicians, different styles colliding in real time in a physical space, and it was extremely exciting.
I remember the first conversations about Jacob's prom. He wanted all his idols to be there. He didn't want this to be celebrating himself. Off the record, it was unbelievably hard to put together because he had so many different artists that he wanted to involve.
The evening featured a number of Jacob's musical heroes. His mum was also in the spotlight.
I remember just thinking, just before standing up, just thinking, I'm so lucky to be here, to be part of the orchestra, to see my boy in action and to actually play.
Jacob also contributed to the orchestration, which accompanied his musical guests.
Mr. Hamid El Kasri.
Extraordinary Moroccan master musician called Hamid El Kasri. He actually came to the BBC Prom and performed his first ever UK performance.
Please welcome to the stage, Take 6.
When Take 6 began around 89, 90s, right around there, we performed at Royal Albert Hall a couple of times, and we now, going back years later on the proms, we realized how big it was and how prestigious it was. It was an amazing experience.
I really found someone like you.
When we were sitting in the audience while we were all preparing for that show and watching him perform with Jules Buckley and just the Metropole, it was a wall of sound, but it was a blank canvas that allowed Jacob to do and to be everything that he was.
That we will be by my side to see
everything that he was doing. It was almost like it was in his playground. He's just a kid having fun.
My life is through.
Somebody said, Jacob, we got a little surprise for you. And they put up the footage of my dear dad playing at the first night of the proms.
Here he is now, Derek Collier, making his first appearance at a promenade concert.
Somebody managed to unearth footage of his grandfather. He was the leader, I think, of the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, and he performed there back in the 1960s.
It's just the most unbelievable thing. Jacob was really bowled over.
He stood on that stage in 1964, and to be there however many years later, 52, with my own prom, it felt pretty surreal. I wish he could have been at that prom. In some ways, he was there.
After the prom, we both burst into tears when we saw each other because we both acknowledged the same thing. He said, I just felt Grandpa was really there.
The audience applauds the performance of Derek Collier.
It was the most wonderful experience and I will never, ever forget it.
What I see in Jacob is the comfort he gets and the pleasure he gets from exploring this world that he's in.
Absolutely.
And from family.
Yes.
From being, this gives him this anchor, the music room and you and his sisters.
He derives a lot from his family and his home around him, but I can tell you that he gives back in spades. He will move out at some point, I'm sure, but at the moment, because he travels the world so much and in so much of the year, I think it's quite a treat just to come back to London and just come back to this place. And boy, we really love seeing him as well.
I made this last night. It's a new idea. This year I found sitting down to make music it's never felt as pressurized as this before. Rather than thinking, oh, I'm just going to do the next thing I'm interested in. There's a lot of kind of low-hanging fruit that seems really appealing, like just do this, 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 and you can be, and you can just take off.
The pressure from our end is for him to be true to himself, to continue to follow his heart's dreams.
Now, finally, I look at these and I think, these are the 5 Grammys.
These are some Grammys, and they each have a different tone. Look. Isn't that lovely? The only thing I've ever really cared about creatively is to sustain the curiosity that I've always had throughout my whole life.
There's a whole bunch of inspiration within him he doesn't even know about yet.
He can do anything, so what do you do? And I feel like the best thing to choose is the thing that really resonates with your soul.
Jacob, I want to ask you about the future. What about the long-term future? Where do you see yourself?
Creatively, nothing really scares me, but I do think that the amount that's possible sometimes is intimidating. I call it creative infinity syndrome.
He should have no bounds, as in he should forever be genreless, he should forever be defiant, he should always just be a maverick.
You know, honestly, I feel like the music will always give me the answers that I need. And sometimes when I feel a bit doubtful or a bit lost or a bit confused or a bit aimless, which I do all the time, to be honest, I'm a human. Sometimes the music just says, you know what, we're going to go here now.
'Cause I'll be standing on the side when you change.
And did you hear from Stevie Wonder at all?
Well, I managed to meet him. I shook his hand. He was like, yeah, what's your name, man? I said, oh, my name's Jacob, Jacob Collier. And he said, oh, yeah, you did that version of Don't You Worry About a Thing, right? And I said, yeah, I did, Stevie, I did. And he said, oh, it's great. It's fantastic, I loved it. And my life was made in that moment. That meeting, I'll never forget it as long as I live. I think this room will always be quite sacred for me. And even when I'm not in here, I think the spirit of it and the groundedness of it is something that I'd love to carry with me wherever I go, whether it's on stage or recording with other people or just traveling and living some life, you know. I feel so much gratitude for the people around me, my family and my friends and the team. And I'm sure I'll travel all over the world in the next few years and I'll be touring and recording and learning and sponging things up. But it's always a privilege to come back here to my original family home and to kind of lay down my materials and have a bit of a rest and then think, well, now what?
They're calling me now.
Just as we were calling it a wrap, Jacob received a phone call from the Quincy Jones team. He had been nominated for 2 more Grammys.
Yo! Oh, what? Oh, are you serious? There's 2 now?
So what's the Grammy for?
I just got 2, well, it's coming in now, but I just got 2 Grammy nominations. Oh wait, I want to watch this. Wait, what, guys, you're on camera, we're filming a documentary right now. Oh wow.